Content warning. The following horror narrative contains fictional depictions of intense psychological themes and disturbing imagery intended for mature audiences. 16 plus. This content is presented as an artistic exploration of fear in storytelling traditions. All characters, events, and scenarios are entirely fictional.
Ryan Asfour wiped condensation from the drive-thru window, his reflection wavering across the glass like ripples in a disturbed pond. The moisture felt strangely cool against his fingertips, colder than it should be despite the restaurant's heating system. He studied his hand under the harsh fluorescent light. Just ordinary water. Focus, Ryan, he told himself, shaking away the strange sensation. Midnight shifts at Burger Barn weren't glamorous, but they paid enough to keep him enrolled in community college classes. His path to something beyond these endless nights. Outside, sheets of October rain transformed the parking lot into a shimmering black mirror, the yellow glow of the restaurant's sign creating unusual patterns across its surface. Ryan checked his watch. 12:17 a.m. 3 more hours until close. 3 more hours until he could go home to his cramped studio apartment, microwave something that wasn't served in a paper wrapper, and collapse into bed with textbooks he was too exhausted to open. The same routine he'd followed 5 nights a week for the past 8 months, each shift blending into the next until time felt less like a progression and more like a circle. The timer for the fryers beeped, the sound lingering oddly in the air. Ryan reset it with practiced efficiency. He'd been doing this job so long his body operated on autopilot, muscle memory performing tasks while his mind wandered elsewhere. Sometimes he wondered if he could sleepwalk through an entire shift, and no one would notice the difference. "You okay?" Layla's voice startled him as she emerged from the back office. His 50-something manager was working late finishing payroll, her lined face illuminated by the artificial light. She tilted her head with concern. "You look tired." "Just need more sleep," he replied, though what he didn't say was that lately he'd been experiencing unusual moments of déjà vu that felt more vivid than normal. Moments where everything seemed strangely familiar, from the pattern of raindrops on the window to the particular flicker of the overhead light to the exact intonation of Layla's voice. "I'm heading out soon," she said, gathering her things. "Marcus should be here in 20 for inventory. You good alone until then?" Something cold settled in Ryan's stomach. "Didn't Marcus quit last week?" he asked, though even as the words left his mouth, uncertainty crept in. Had that been last week? Or was it next week? The memory felt simultaneously solid and flexible. Layla stared at him oddly, her brow furrowing. "What are you talking about? Marcus has worked here longer than both of us." Ryan nodded slowly, heat crawling up his neck. "Right. Sorry, mixing him up with someone else." After Layla left, the restaurant felt different, larger somehow, the distances between the counter and the grill stretching imperceptibly. The ceiling seemed higher than it had been during his afternoon shift, the corners of the room slightly misaligned. Ryan had been noticing these spatial peculiarities for 3 weeks now. They had started subtly. A door that seemed slightly narrower, a hallway that took 2 extra steps to traverse. His doctor had suggested better sleep habits and less caffeine, recommending regular breaks and breathing exercises. But Ryan suspected something else, something connected to this place. As a child, he'd come here with his father every Friday night. Once when he was 9, he'd gotten separated and found himself alone in the restroom. There'd been a moment, brief but vivid in his memory, when the walls had seemed different and a whisper had come from nowhere in particular. Not yet. He'd convinced himself it was imagination. But lately, that memory had been surfacing with surprising frequency. The headset crackled. Ryan startled. No cars had pulled up to the speaker box. Static hissed in his ear, punctuated by what sounded like breathing. He adjusted the volume. "Welcome to Burger Barn. Can I take your order?" Ryan recited mechanically, squinting through rain-streaked glass at the empty drive-thru lane. The static intensified, acquiring a rhythmic quality like distant machinery, then cleared. "I'd like to place an order for inside." The voice was unusual, slightly distorted, like someone speaking through an old radio with poor reception. Ryan frowned. "Sir, the dining area is closed. Drive-thru only after 10. A pause. During it, Ryan noticed the digital menu board behind him, flickering between normal menu items and something else. A fraction of a second, where all items were replaced with a single listing he couldn't quite read. "I'm already inside." The hairs on Ryan's arms rose, a strange metallic taste appearing in his mouth. He glanced toward the dining area, dark, except for the dim emergency lights that seemed to illuminate less space than they should. The doors were locked. He'd done it himself at closing. "Very funny, Marcus," Ryan called out, his voice catching slightly as he tried to sound casual. "You got me." No response came from the darkness. Ryan slipped off his headset, placing it carefully on the counter. The kitchen hummed with familiar sounds, the gentle rumble of refrigeration units, the occasional drip from a faucet not fully closed. But underneath those sounds was something else, a soft, irregular tapping. Tap, 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 tap. It wasn't random. There was pattern to it, mathematical precision that reminded Ryan of code or language. "Marcus?" Ryan called again, his voice cracking slightly. "Is that you?" The tapping stopped abruptly. He moved toward the swinging doors that led to the dining area, his non-slip shoes squeaking against the recently mopped floor. The restaurant felt colder suddenly, the air conditioning seemingly working overtime despite the autumn chill outside. But it was an unusual coldness that made his skin prickle with awareness rather than discomfort. Through the small round windows in the doors, the dining area appeared empty, just shadows and the outlines of tables and chairs. But when Ryan blinked, he could swear the arrangement was subtly different, though he couldn't specify exactly how. "This isn't happening," he whispered to himself, pressing his palms against his eyes until colors bloomed in the darkness. When he opened them, everything seemed normal again. Just an empty restaurant at night. Nothing more. Ryan recalled the breathing technique his doctor had recommended. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. He'd started the practice 3 months ago when he first noticed unusual gaps in his awareness, moments where he'd be taking an order and then find himself completing a different task, with the time between somehow missing. He pushed one door open slightly, wincing at its creak. "Hello?" he called out. "We're closed." The dining area remained still and silent. Ryan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding and turned back toward the kitchen. His headset was crackling again. Approaching cautiously, Ryan lifted it to one ear. "I'd like the special, please. The one that's not on the menu." Ryan's mouth went dry, a wave of lightheadedness making him grip the counter for support. "Who is this?" "We're closed." "You're never closed, Ryan." "Not really. Some places never stop. Changing." The sound of his name in that unfamiliar voice sent a chill through him, followed by a flash of warmth that left him dizzy. How did it know his name? "Check the freezer, Ryan." Ryan glanced toward the walk-in freezer at the back of the kitchen. The heavy steel door was closed, as it should be, a thin line of light visible at its edges. "Marcus will be here for inventory," Ryan reasoned. "This is some elaborate prank. Or I need more sleep. The doctor said perception can be affected by exhaustion." "Marcus! This isn't funny, man." Only the hum of equipment answered him, but that hum seemed to be modulating now, rising and falling in patterns that almost formed words at the edge of comprehension. The headset crackled again. "He can't hear you. None of them can. You've been noticed." Noticed. The word struck Ryan with unexpected familiarity, a half-remembered dream of standing in a crowd, waiting to be singled out for something he couldn't name. Ryan removed the headset, setting it on the counter. His heart pounded as he stared at the freezer door. He should just leave, clock out, claim illness, and let Marcus handle whatever this was. But something pulled him toward the freezer instead. Each step felt deliberate, as if he were making a choice that had been waiting for him. As he approached, the floor beneath his feet seemed different, the texture changing subtly with each step. "Just tired," Ryan told himself. "Just like the doctor said, perception gets unreliable when you're exhausted." His hand trembled slightly as he gripped the heavy handle and pulled. A rush of cold air escaped, curling around him like invisible tendrils. But beneath the cold was another sensation, a subtle vibration that traveled up his arm and resonated in his chest like distant music. The freezer was empty of people, just rows of neatly labeled boxes and hanging ingredients. Relief washed over Ryan until he noticed the inventory clipboard lying on the floor, pen still attached. Marcus would never leave it there. The pen had rolled to a stop against the back wall, its position seeming oddly deliberate. "Marcus?" Ryan called, his voice small in the enclosed space. As he bent to pick up the clipboard, he noticed something on the freezer's white wall, a mark that hadn't been there during his shift earlier. Stepping closer, Ryan realized it wasn't an ordinary smudge but a handprint. Not rust-colored as he'd first thought, but iridescent, shimmering with colors that seemed to shift as he looked at them. The shape was unusual, longer and more slender than seemed natural, as if belonging to someone with unusually proportioned hands. Behind him, the freezer door closed with a soft click that somehow felt more significant than a slam would have. Ryan turned quickly, heart racing. He tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The safety release button had been disabled. Impossible. That was against every safety code. His breath came in visible clouds as panic set in. The light flickered once, twice. Please don't go out. Please don't. Darkness. Ryan fumbled for his phone, hands trembling from both cold and anxiety. The screen's glow illuminated only a small portion of the freezer, casting more shadows than light. The temperature seemed to be dropping rapidly, far below the normal freezer setting, yet paradoxically, he felt an unusual warmth radiating from somewhere deeper in the space. A soft tap 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 sounded from the other side of the door. "Help! Anyone!" "I'm still waiting for my order, Ryan," came the voice, somehow clear despite the thick door between them. No longer distorted by the headset, it sounded hollow, like words echoing in an empty hall. But there was something else in it now, a multiplicity, as if several voices were speaking in perfect unison. Ryan pressed against the door, his heart racing. "Who are you? What do you want?" His voice cracked with apprehension. The voice answered with the same unsettling calm. "I told you, I want the special." "We don't have any special," Ryan cried, pressing his palm against the cold metal door. The voice replied with certainty, "You do now." The phone's light flickered and died, plunging Ryan into absolute darkness. The cold was penetrating his uniform, making him shiver. Yet contradictorily, he could sense warmth emanating from somewhere behind him, as if two different temperature zones existed in the same space. A sound came from behind him, from the back of the freezer. "Who's there?" Ryan whispered, pressing his back against the door. His phone buzzed in his hand, a notification. With trembling fingers, he managed to reactivate the screen. One new message. "Unknown number. The special is almost ready. You've been preparing for it your entire life." The sound grew clearer, more distinct. In the phone's dim light, Ryan saw that the back wall of the freezer no longer held shelves of food. Instead, there was an opening, like the freezer had somehow extended into a passageway that shouldn't exist. Couldn't exist given the restaurant's layout. Ryan had a sudden, vivid memory. Age 9, staring at an employee-only door in this very restaurant, watching a worker emerge looking somehow changed, distant. The worker had looked directly at him and said something that had stayed with him for years. Some places transform more than just what's on the menu. From the unexplained opening came a sound unlike anything Ryan had heard before. Not threatening, but unfamiliar, like movement, following different natural laws than he understood. The light from Ryan's phone revealed something shifting in the darkness. Not Marcus, not anyone Ryan recognized. The shape seemed to change as his eyes tried to make sense of it, like looking at an optical illusion that refused to settle into something familiar. His phone died again. In the darkness, Ryan sensed a presence near him, cold, yet somehow radiating an energy he'd never experienced before. "I've been watching you, Ryan," the voice said, no longer coming through any speaker but seemingly from everywhere at once. 5 nights a week, 8 months, same routine, same predictable existence. You perceived something once, when you were a child. You weren't ready then. You are now. Ryan couldn't move. His muscles seemed frozen as he sensed something approaching, not threatening, but utterly unknown. The voice grew softer, almost intimate. "Some only observe," it continued, "while others become part of something greater. But you're something else, a connector, a translator. You've noticed it, haven't you? The way this place seems different. The way time seems to loop. That's why you've been drawn back, working the same shifts, repeating the same patterns. You've been discovering something without realizing it. The presence." Ryan struggled to define what it was. Shifted before him. Even in darkness, he sensed its movements with unusual clarity, as if perceiving it through means beyond ordinary sight. The voice continued its revelation. "There are places where reality intersects with something else," it explained. "Places of transition and change, where the ordinary becomes extraordinary, where routines become rituals. All patterns connect, Ryan, and some patterns extend beyond what most people perceive as reality." The entity, Ryan could only think of it as something beyond ordinary classification, seemed to move around him, not threatening, but evaluating. In the absolute darkness, he somehow perceived it more clearly than he would have with his eyes, as if it communicated directly with his awareness. Outside the freezer, the drive-thru speaker crackled to life. Another customer, pulling up for a late-night meal, unaware of what was happening just a few dozen feet away. "Listen," the presence urged as Ryan felt a subtle change in the air around his wrist, not grabbing, but connecting, like completing a circuit. "Life continues. Orders keep coming. But for you, perception is about to expand." The darkness in the freezer seemed to deepen, to take form, to fold inward like intricate origami. The edges of the space began to emit a soft luminescence in colors Ryan had never seen before, revealing glimpses of what lay beyond. Not another room or space, but a system. A vast, intricate network that Ryan suddenly understood had always existed alongside ordinary reality. "You've sensed it," the presence said, its voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere. "The repetition, the patterns, the sense that you're part of something larger than what's immediately visible. That's the nature of reality, Ryan. Everything is simultaneously observer and observed." With sudden clarity, Ryan understood what the special was. Not something to be feared, not a threat in any ordinary sense, but an invitation, an opportunity to step beyond ordinary perception into a role he didn't yet comprehend but had been unknowingly prepared for through thousands of repeated actions, creating patterns that resonated with rhythms in this other layer of existence. "What if I'm not ready?" Ryan whispered, finding his voice at last. The presence seemed to pause, and when it spoke again, something like gentle amusement emanated from it. "There is no ready or unready. There is only awareness or its absence. You'll leave here tonight thinking you've made a choice, return to your everyday life, your community college aspirations. But your perception has already shifted, Ryan. You've already begun to see. The only question is whether you'll embrace this awareness or try to forget it." Ryan felt something fundamental changing in his perception, as if his entire life had been spent looking at reality through a narrow window, and now suddenly the glass had dissolved, revealing a vista stretching in all directions. The restaurant, his job, the endless repetition, they weren't meaningless. They were preparation. "Time to decide, Ryan," the presence said, its form becoming indistinct again, boundaries blurring. "Your ordinary shift is ending, but something else is beginning." The freezer door swung open behind him. Ryan stumbled backward, falling onto the kitchen floor. The fluorescent light seemed painfully bright after the darkness. He gasped, pulling air into lungs that felt both frozen and energized. The freezer looked normal, shelves of food, no opening, no unusual presence. Just an ordinary commercial freezer in an ordinary fast food restaurant. Ryan scrambled to his feet, heart still pounding. He looked at his phone. 3:02 a.m. Almost closing time. But how? He'd only been in the freezer for minutes. The drive-thru headset lay on the counter where he'd left it, silent now. With shaking hands, Ryan clocked out. He left his name tag on the counter. He wouldn't be coming back. Couldn't come back. Whatever had happened in that freezer, whatever he'd experienced, he needed time to process it. As he pushed open the door to the parking lot, the night air hit his face. It felt different somehow, richer, more textured, as if he was detecting aspects of the world that had always been present, but never before noticeable. His car sat alone in the employee lot. Ryan fumbled with his keys, dropped them, bent to retrieve them. When he straightened, he noticed the restaurant's sign, reflected in a puddle, but the reflection showed patterns and symbols that weren't actually present on the sign itself. Though no one was physically present, Ryan heard the voice once more in his mind. "Until we meet again, Ryan," the familiar presence seemed to say. "The special is still available, and now you can see the menu." Ryan drove home in a daze, reality seeming more vibrant at the edges of his vision, momentary glimpses of patterns and connections he'd never noticed before. At traffic lights, he could sense rhythms in their changing colors, meanings in their timing. The radio between stations produced static that seemed almost melodic. In his apartment, Ryan collapsed onto his bed without undressing. Sleep came instantly, deep and full of extraordinary visions. When he woke the next morning, everything looked different. The experience in the freezer hadn't faded like a dream, but had crystallized into something profound. Not stress or exhaustion, but revelation. Ryan called the restaurant and gave notice. Layla sounded disappointed but not surprised. High turnover in fast food, she sighed. Good luck, Ryan. A week passed, then two. Ryan focused on his classes with new intensity, seeing connections between subjects he'd never noticed before. He started keeping a journal of his perceptions, documenting the patterns he now recognized everywhere. By the third week, he'd begun to understand that his experience hadn't been an ending, but a beginning, until he noticed the menu. He was scrolling through a food delivery app, looking for dinner, when he saw it, Burger Barn, offering a new item, the special, for those who can see it. Ryan's finger hovered over the screen. The description box contained a pattern of symbols that would have seemed like random characters to him before, but now communicated meaning he could almost grasp. His phone chimed with a notification. Unknown. Number. Ready to continue your journey? Ryan felt anticipation rather than fear. He found himself typing a response, his fingers moving with confidence rather than automation. Ryan's reply, yes, I'm beginning to understand. 3 dots appeared, pulsing with colors that seemed to shift between known and unknown hues. The message from the unknown number appeared. Good. The doorway is everywhere once you know how to perceive it, and you're starting to perceive, aren't you? Ryan looked up from his phone and noticed that the world around him seemed layered somehow. Not threatening, but infinitely more complex than he'd previously understood. In his perception, possibilities that hadn't been apparent before waited to be explored, spilling new awareness into his ordinary room. He understood now. He hadn't escaped that night. He'd merely begun a journey, from employee to something else, from observer to participant, from order taker to something beyond ordinary perception. The new employee at Burger Barn found Ryan's name tag in the break room. No one remembered a Ryan working there, but the tag looked official, so he pinned it on. That night, as he wiped condensation from the drive-thru window, he noticed something unusual in his reflection. Just for a moment, the boundaries between himself and his surroundings seemed to blur before returning to normal. The headset crackled with static. The new employee adjusted it before speaking. "Welcome to Burger Barn," he said automatically, the words feeling strangely familiar. "Can I take your order?" A voice responded, distinctive and somehow familiar. "Yes," it said, though the new employee couldn't understand why it felt recognizable. "I'd like to place an order for inside." And somewhere between ordinary reality and extraordinary perception, Ryan continued his journey, his first steps into an endless exploration that had always been waiting for him.